Welcome to the Determined People podcast. We are committed to spreading encouragement, strength, and hope to a world in desperate need of it. Everywhere you look in today's culture, you see stories of remarkable people experiencing remarkable success. Our show focuses on the backstories of everyday, relatable people who have achieved greatness in their lives. We focus on the story behind what we see in the world. Our hope is that you find yourself in these stories, that you say, if that person made it, so can I. And now, our host, John Darrell.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here. 2 months prior to her death on April 20th of 1999, Rachel Joy Scott wrote a paper called My Ethics, My Codes of Life. In that paper, she wrote the following words: "Compassion is the greatest form of love humans have to offer. I have this theory that if one person could go out of their way to show compassion, it will start a chain reaction of the same. You never know how far a little kindness can go." And you know, Rachel, since her death, has started chain reactions all over the world, over 30 million of them so far. My guest today is Darrell Scott, Rachel's father. And Rachel was the first child killed at Columbine High School in that horrible event of 1999. After her death, through a sequence of events that we're going to walk through today, Darrell and his wife Sandy, who is Rachel's stepmom, co-founded an organization called Rachel's Challenge. Rachel's Challenge, by the way, disclaimer, I serve on the board for Rachel's Challenge and have for almost 9 years now. Rachel's Challenge creates safer, better connected schools. You know, we talk about making the hardening the target and everything else, but Rachel's Challenge softens the heart. You see kids who let their guards down. They allow their fellow students to see them for who they truly are after hearing this story. So without any hesitation, let's get going. Darrell, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you, John.
So before we get started, and we've got a lot to cover, would you just share with our audience, tell us about Rachel?
Well, I had 5 children, and I have 3 stepchildren and 13 grandchildren. So we're surrounded by kids. But Rachel was my middle child. I had 2 older daughters. And when Rachel was before she was born, we were looking forward to having a son. And I already had a name picked out. The name was Craig, because I grew up with Terry Bradshaw. He lived right across the street from us in Shreveport, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. Terry had a younger brother named Craig, who was like my younger brother. He stayed over at our house all the time. He and my brother Larry were best friends. And I liked the name Craig. So I was going to name my 3rd child Craig. And we had a visiting minister that happened to be staying with us just before Rachel was born. And back in those days, they didn't have, you know, all the machinery and equipment to tell you what the sex of the child would be beforehand. This is back in the dark ages. And so we didn't know whether it was going to be a boy or girl, but all the symptoms seemed to show, the old wives' tale symptoms seemed to show that we were going to have a son. So I was excited about Craig coming into the world. And this gentleman was known to pray over people almost prophetically. And I don't want to spook anybody out by what I'm about to say, but he asked if he could pray over the unborn child at that point. Mm-hmm. And he did. And as he began to pray, he looked up at me and he said, "Darrell, I know you want a son, and I would like to say that this is going to be a boy, but I can't do that." He said, "But I will tell you this, she's going to bring a lot of joy to a lot of people."
Wow.
And my heart stank. I was disappointed because I wanted a son, and I was hoping he would be wrong. But the minute she was born, all that went away. Beautiful, beautiful little baby girl. And we named her Rachel Joy Scott because of that prophetic word that was uttered before she was even born.
Wow.
And that word became true. She has become a joy to millions of people around the world in many different countries. So that was the first miracle that we encountered with Rachel's life. And on her tombstone to this day, it says, "She was the joy of our life." So her name began with joy. Her life began with joy, bringing joy to our family. Her death has brought joy to many, many people through her life story.
Absolutely.
So Rachel was a middle child. She was outgoing. She was bubbly. She was just never negative about anything. She's one of those children that she could always, you know, the glass was always half full, never half empty. She would bring home stray cats, stray dogs. She stood up for kids that were being picked on. And we have so many stories we share in schools that you've heard about that. And those stories became the foundation for Rachel's Challenge, along with her diaries.
I never knew the story of that man that prophesied that she would be a daughter. I never knew that. But, you know, it ties in with everything else we're going to cover today, because there's some really eerie things surrounding her life. And so I'm going to ask the audience, stay with us, because there's a lot here. But I promise, if you'll stay with us, it will all come together and come into focus and gel. So let's get started on that. What went through your mind, Darrell, when you got the phone call from Sandy that there had been a shooting at the high school?
Well, the first thing that went through my mind, there had been school shootings before, but they were always one or two students killed. I immediately turned into a mathematician. I thought there's 1,600 students at that school. What are the chances that my son or my daughter would be one of the victims, or that my nephew or my niece? I had 4 people in my family in that school with 1,600 students. And I was thinking, when she first called me, that maybe 1 or 2 students had been shot at. I didn't even know anybody had been killed. But I ran out to my car. Actually, I had a pickup truck outside a store that I was at. I ran out to my truck, turned on the radio, and that's when I was stunned, because the announcer was crying, and he said that up to 30 students had been shot, many of them had been killed. And my heart nearly stopped beating. I mean, I just went into a panic mode. But during that time, I raced toward the school, but I got caught up in a massive traffic jam. And so I crept along, and they were telling parents to go to an elementary school nearby. And on the way there, suddenly there was kind of a peace that came over me. I felt simultaneously, and I don't know if people can relate to this or not, but both panic and peace. Part of me was panicked, and part of me, deeper down, was at peace. And the peaceful side, it was almost like a whisper. I couldn't hear it audibly, but I kept hearing these words in my mind. This is a spiritual event. This is a spiritual event. And I didn't understand that. And my brother was the first person I saw when I got to the elementary school. And he said, we've heard from my 2 kids. We've heard from Craig. We haven't heard from Rachel. And I said to him, Larry, this is a spiritual event. He remembers that. And we both look back on it now and see that there was a clash between good and evil that took place at Columbine that day. And there's so many things that surround the story, not just of Rachel, but Columbine itself, that have spiritual implications.
Wow. Ooh. So, and I'd like for you to describe, you know, you found out Craig was safe. You're unknown. If you didn't know for 24 hours if Rachel was dead or alive, you were hoping that she had crawled off into a closet and somebody would find her. You know, men, we're called to lead. Were you able to lead your family when you're numb and trying to keep them sane, but yet also grieve yourself?
Well, the first thing we hoped for was that she was hiding somewhere. But we knew that after around 5 o'clock that first evening, when we hadn't heard anything, and we suspected she was a victim at that point. But since we hadn't heard anything, we knew that she would have left her hiding place by this time and gone to a house and called us. So our only hope was that she had been wounded and that she was in a hospital, maybe unconscious and not able to communicate. That's a horrible thing when you're hoping that your child has been wounded and is in a hospital. But that was our only hope. And by midnight that night, we called every hospital, and there was no answer. And we were just in total despair. We didn't get official word until 11 o'clock the next day. It was 24 hours, almost exactly, to the point in time when she was killed. And we had a split family. Rachel's mom was married. I had a fiance, Sandy, who's now my wife. And but we all came together as a family with our children. And it was just we prayed together. We still clung to a slim piece of hope. But the days that followed were just, I can remember waking up one morning, and I know how horrible this is going to sound, but I heard a bird singing outside the window, and I was angry at the bird for being happy. because I felt like, how can you be happy when my daughter's been murdered? And so now I know how people feel when they lose a child, especially when the child's been murdered. But I also feel for those who've lost their children through suicide. For every one child that's killed in a school shooting, like my daughter, 362 children commit suicide. For every Rachel, there's 362 families grieving because their child committed suicide. And one of the things we do in our programming and in our school programs is we see a lot of suicides prevented. We get 150 emails and phone calls and letters each year, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of students that were planning to commit suicide that are now alive because of Rachel's story. So it was a difficult time to lead our families through all of this because we were swamped by media every single day. I was asked to go and speak before Congress a month after the tragedy. So my life was in an upheaval. It was media, talking to national leaders, and then being swamped with requests to come and share Rachel's story. And these were not small events. These were events with 10, 20, 30, in one event, 400,000 people, the largest event I ever spoke at in an outdoor setting. So our lives were just turned upside down. We grieved, and yet we were able to celebrate her life at the same time. So it was different from most people's process of grieving. We celebrated her life instead of focusing on her death. And as we read her diaries and began to hear stories about her acts of kindness to young people like Adam, a young boy who was born with mental disabilities, physical and mental. And Adam was in a hallway at school, and two boys had knocked his books out of his hands and were calling him names, making fun of him. And Rachel ran down the hall, got between those two boys and Adam, doubled up her fists, and she said, "If you touch him again, you're going to have to fight me." I'm sure they were scared out of their minds. They're looking down at this little girl half their size, threatening them. They're probably thinking she's got to be Chuck Norris's daughter or something. And they backed off, and she and Adam became friends. And she had invited him a week before she died. She said, "Adam, why don't you join me and some of my friends? We'll go to a movie together." Adam had never had any kid invite him to go anywhere. And he was telling us the story with tears streaming down his face. And he said, "Mr. Scott, I never got a chance to do that." And so my wife and I took him out in memory of Rachel. And it's stories like that we share with students, that we can't go into a school and tell a student, "Be kind."
Sure.
We can't go into a school and tell them what to do, but we can share stories that make them want to. And it's the want to that we bring that very few school assemblies are able to bring. A lot of school assemblies bring the how to. We bring the want to. And we follow that up with the how to. And then we follow that up with applications through our Friends of Rachel clubs. There's over 10,000 of those all across the country doing amazing acts of kindness.
You said something, the first time I met you was January of 2013, and I heard Rachel's story told by you. But you said something in that assembly that stuck with me. What you said was, if you capture the heart of a child, they'll give you everything else.
That's right.
That's
young people are looking for, so many young people don't have a father figure. Many of them don't have a good home life, and they're looking for an adult that they can trust, or they're looking for a role model. And Rachel's become a role model to so many of them. And we train our speakers to really allow their hearts to open up to the kids afterwards. Don't walk off the stage and go back to your hotel room. Stay there and give them hugs. Stay there and spend the rest of the day with them. And they do that. And those kids feel that. And that it's that feeling on the inside that brings the desire to want to change. And so I got a phone call from a mom a while back who I thought she was angry at first. She said, "What did you do to my child?" And I said, "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." She said, one of your speakers just came to our school. I got your phone number. My son came home and told me for the first time in 3 years that he loved me. And then he went and cleaned his room. She said, "I'm so happy." She said, "What did you do to my son?" "We didn't do anything to your son. He just opened up his heart after he heard the story of my daughter."
Absolutely. But you have story after story after story like that. I mean, there's stories of kids who were going to take their life the very day the presenter showed up in the school. That happens more often than not. I want to back up to a couple of things. One is the year before, 1 year to the day before Columbine, April 20th of 1998. Like I said, this is all going to make some sense, but I want to get these right, so I wrote them down. A journal entry from your daughter. I have a heavy heart. Something inside of me makes me want to cry. I don't know what it is. Something is going to happen. May of 1998, another journal entry. This will be my last year, Lord. I have gotten what I can. Thank you. A letter to her cousin Jeff. God is going to use me to touch the young people of the nation. One more journal entry. Use me to reach the unreached. But there's a story you told me one time, and that was, she said, Dad, one day you're going to see me on Oprah Winfrey. Would you share that story with the audience?
I sure will. I walked in the living room when Rachel was about 15 years old, about 2 years before she was killed. Mm-hmm. And she was lying on the floor watching Oprah Winfrey on television, had her hands under her chin, elbows propped up on the floor. And she just looked up. She always had a big smile. And she said, Dad, someday you're going to see me on Oprah. And I said, I don't doubt that. Walked out of the room, like any dad would say. Sure. I had forgotten about that. And then after she died, I was on Oprah Winfrey's show 3 different times. And the first time I was on with my son, Craig, and I walked up on the stage and there was a big picture of Rachel underneath the words, The Oprah Winfrey Show. And instantly, when I saw her picture, I remembered the day that she had told me, someday you're going to see me on Oprah. I turned as white as a sheet. My legs were shaking. And Oprah, we hadn't started filming yet. Oprah was coming to greet me across the stage. And she said, Darrell, she grabbed me. She said, are you okay? You look pale. And I said, you're not going to believe what I just remembered. I said, when I saw her picture under your name, and I told her the story, and she started crying. We had to interrupt that first show that we did about 11 times because either Oprah or I would break down crying because it was just shortly after the Columbine tragedy. Wow. And so a lot of the things Rachel wrote and said became true.
Wow. Many. And even the things that I just read came true. Less than a year after she wrote, this will be my last year, Lord, she was no longer with us.
It was ironic. She had 2 premonitions, very strong premonitions, that she would die at a young age. In fact, in one of her writings, she said, I'm dying. Slowly, I'm dying. Can't remember exactly what, but she said, it isn't suicide. I consider it homicide. The world that's been created has led to my death. And she wrote that just a short time before she died. And in her final poem, she wrote like a prayer, and she said, who will you give to walk with me through these halls of a tragedy? So a lot of her writing was prophetic about her own death, but also she wrote many times that she would have an impact on the world.
Yeah. It's just so self-contradictory because I've got a copy of this with me, Ambassador of Kindness. I've watched this thing 20 times and I cry every time I watch it, okay? I cry every time I hear Rachel's story, and I've heard it 20 times. But I've got to tell you, there's, before I start crying now, you got a lot of phone calls after Rachel's death. You got calls from Charlton Heston, from Chuck Norris, but you also got that call from Congress. And we do have the clip from YouTube of your testimony from Congress, in front of Congress, at the end of today's episode. People can watch that, and it caused a chain reaction of more phone calls, more requests to speak. But you got a phone call from a man in Cincinnati. Would you share with our audience that story?
Yes. I 6 weeks after Rachel died, I received a very strange phone call from a man by the name of Frank Amedia, who lived actually in Canton, Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And Frank said, Mr. Scott, you don't know me. We've never met. He said, it took me a while to get your phone number, but he said, I had to call you and your family. And he said, it has something to do with your daughter. And of course, he had my attention. And he said, you're going to think this is a strange call. You may hang up on me. You may think I'm crazy. But he said, here goes. Here's what happened. He said, for the last week, I've had a reoccurring dream. And it's a dream about your daughter's eyes. And in the dream, I've seen her eyes with a trickle of tears falling from her eyes, and the tears are watering a flower. There's something growing out of the ground from her tears. And I keep having this over and over. I've told my family about it. I've told some of my employees about it. And he said, I had to find out if it had any meaning for you and your family. And I told him, Frank, I'm sorry, it doesn't mean anything. And he said, would you just please take my phone number down and call me if it ever does? And I almost didn't. I just thought maybe it was a nut, calling me. And I did take his phone number and name down, stuck it in my desk drawer, thought I'd never talk to him again. A week later, I got a phone call from the sheriff's department, and they said, we have your Rachel's backpack ready for you to pick up. So I rushed over to get it, and I took it out to my truck. And on the way out, I can't even describe the emotions. I was holding her blood-stained backpack with 4 bullet holes through it, and I wanted to see what was in her backpack. We just suspected her final diary was there. And when I took it out to the truck and opened it up, took out her last diary, and like any parent, I wanted to see the last thing she had written that day. So I turned to the last page of her diary. And when I turned to the last page of her diary, if you've got that picture, you can show it. But I was looking at a picture she had drawn 20 minutes before she was killed. And it was a picture of her eyes and a trickle of tears flowing from her eyes. The tears were watering a rose, America's national flower. And the rose was growing out of a Columbine flower, the name of the school, and it's Colorado State flower. Mm-hmm. So you've got her eyes, a trickle of tears falling. When they touched the rose, they turned dark. And for years, I thought those were blood drops falling from her eyes. But a teacher came up to me at a conference, educational conference I was speaking at several years ago, and she said, those aren't blood drops. And I said, why do you say that? And she said, I think they're seeds. And I said, well, why do you think they're seeds? She said, because in the dream the man had, he saw something growing from her tears. Blood drops don't cause things to grow out of the ground, but seeds do. And I said, I think you're right. So I changed the story since then. the tears, and here's the ironic thing about it. There were 13 clear tears before they touched the rose and turned to seeds. And there were 13 people murdered within 2 hours of her drawing that picture, a teacher and 12 students. A teacher and 12 students impacted the world at Columbine. And 2,000 years earlier, that same week, because it was Easter week, another teacher and 12 students had impacted the world.
Yes. I think it was like 2,000 years to the day prior to Columbine.
I was told that by an old rabbi that the old Jewish calendar, that was the very day that Christ was crucified.
So
and it was a teacher and 12 students.
What went through your mind when you're looking at this drawing? A man 1,500 miles away had described it to you earlier.
Oh, I can't even describe it. I was just in so much shock. And I took the drawing home, and back then we did a lot of faxing. Mm-hmm. And so I faxed, I called him and asked if he had a fax number. He did. I faxed it to him. He called me back just sobbing. He said, Mr. Scott, this is exactly what I saw in the dream.
The dream stopped, right?
Yeah, the dream stopped. Not only that, but her teacher, Mrs. Carruthers, saw her drawing that picture just before she went out and was shot and killed. And Miss Carruthers told us, and we have this on videotape, she said, I asked Rachel about her drawing. I said, it's beautiful. And she said she didn't even comment on the drawing. She just looked up at me and said, Mrs. Carruthers, I'm going to have an impact on the world. And those were some of the last words Rachel spoke.
Well, I've had chills during this entire interview. Even though I know all this stuff, it still impacts me 11 years after learning about Rachel and meeting you and hearing all these stories over and over. But it hasn't gone away. What do you think? I try to take an intangible, Rachel's beautiful story, and make it into a tangible, and there's no way. What do you think causes the hearts of some of the most hardened kids in school, gang members, to change and go from being a problem to being part of the solution? What do you think? What's happening here?
Well, I'm not going to state this as fact. It's my opinion, and some of your listeners may disagree with me. But I really believe there's a divine inspiration breathed into her story. Throughout history, there have been stories that have really changed the world. Abraham Lincoln said to Harriet Beecher Stowe, you're the little lady who wrote the book that caused this big war that brought about the freedom of the slaves. And that was Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, unfortunately, they've kind of twisted Uncle Tom's Cabin to be a negative today, but it was a very positive back then that actually caused the North to rise up against slavery. And it was a huge motive, a story. Stories throughout history have had huge impacts on culture and on nations and on the world. And I think Rachel's story has an inspiration built into it. It's got all the elements of intrigue, mystery. Uh, there's just something intangible, like you said, that you can't put your finger on, but it's unique. And everyone that hears the story in its fullness, and that's why we've just written a book called Rachel Joy Scott, Her Life and Legacy, that goes into all this. And we put 60 videos through QR codes in the book so that people can see a ton of videos, as well as pictures and stories. But stories change the world.
Yes, they
and
do.
that's my answer.
Our
I
stories
believe
connect
there's
us.
divine inspiration there.
I agree. You can't miss it. You cannot miss the spiritual piece of this. Call it whatever you want to. And I know that Rachel's Challenge is a non-religious, non-political organization. Right. It's not about that. It's about touching the hearts and minds of our young people who are killing themselves in epidemic proportions. And it has a major impact on stopping youth suicide. It has a major impact in stopping bullying behavior. And it connects schools. I think it allows kids the green light to be, everybody wants to be seen and heard, right? I think it gives them the green light to, let me show you myself for the first time ever, and let me see who you are. And that creates a better connected school.
John, that's why we do much more than just an assembly. The assembly is what creates the want to. The kids are eager to do something. And then we do a training for 90 minutes, and we create a Friends of Rachel club. Mm-hmm. We call them FAR clubs, F-O-R, Friends of Rachel. And we call them FAR clubs because we tell kids we're not against anything. We're not against hatred. We're for love. Mm-hmm. We're not against violence. We're for peace. So what you focus on, you become. And so many, there are actually bullying programs out there that have proven to create more bullying in schools than when they came in. And I'm not there to put anybody's programs down, but what you focus on is what you become. So we focus on answers and solutions, not problems. And we create a Friends of Rachel club, and then we give them activities to do. Mm-hmm. Activities like how you can greet a new student in your school. And the club appoints certain of the students that do that regularly. Then how you can make your teachers feel better by acts of letters of appreciation. Mm-hmm. So we have a new letters program, a new students program, outreach community program, and all these programs begin to grow. And then schools adopt what they call Rachel's pantries. They'll take a classroom that's student run and fill it with food donated from grocery stores for students who come to school hungry. Oh, wow. Or maybe they don't get anything at home, and after school they can go in and get anything they want free of charge. We have Rachel's closets where kids can get brand name clothing free of charge in the school. Shoes, underwear, coats, dresses, pants, shirts. We have hairdressers that volunteer to come once a month to the school and cut any kid's hair that wants a neat hairstyle that maybe can't afford to get it. So it's involving the community, not just the school. And that's what's beautiful about the programs.
Absolutely. Now you're making me cry again. So a couple other things, then we'll wrap up. I'd like for you to, they talk about hardening the target, which I think is a good thing. You make a school practically impenetrable, right? But what's missing from that equation, Darrell?
Well, first of all, it doesn't work. If a student wants to go in and kill, they will bypass. Eric and Dylan actually laughed on a video and said, you're going to pass 100 more gun laws, and it's not going to stop people like us. They broke 50 or 60 gun laws doing what they did that day. So passing more laws, I'm all for laws that would prevent violence. Don't get me wrong. Sure. I'm for anything that would prevent violence. And if we can harden the target to a degree without it turning the school into a prison, I'm for anything that prevents the violence. But the number one thing that prevents violence is not hardening the target. It's softening the heart of young people. We are the only program I'm aware of that has prevented 8 school shootings that we know of. Now, there's probably been others we don't know of. I don't know of any other program on the planet that prevents over 150 suicides per year. And we do that. And I'm not saying that braggingly. I'm just saying it. Oh, no. I'm saying it respectfully in honor of my daughter, that her story touches the hearts of young people. So yes, maybe we need both. Maybe we need a certain degree of more caution in our schools. And I'm all for anything that prevents violence. I'll say that again. But I can tell you that the number one prevention is often ignored. We want to send the ambulance to the bottom of the cliff, but we don't want to send the fence at the top of the cliff to prevent the ambulance from having to come at the bottom of the cliff. We're the fence at the top of the cliff.
You know, a couple of things. We need to do another podcast in the future and talk about all the programs that Rachel's Challenge. I knew nothing about Rachel's Pantry. I knew nothing about Rachel's Closet. These are wonderful things. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And also I'd love to talk about the chain reaction day. I participated in the chain reaction day. You see kids apologize to others that they've hurt years ago, and you see the child accept the apology. It's like, I'm in awe of, you got a bunch of kids that get together, and over 7 hours, all their guard comes down, everything goes away, and they're stripped bare, and they connect. And I'm like, it's absolutely, I will serve on your board for as long as you'll let me hang around. I'll tell you that, because it's a mission I believe in. I grew up in a tension-filled, violent home, and I needed a Rachel story when I was a kid. So I was never suicidal, gratefully, but I needed something to give me hope, and that's one thing that Rachel's story does. 150 letters you get, how many more, probably 10 times more than people aren't writing in, right? But she's been starting chain reactions of kindness and compassion all over the world since her untimely death. I have one last question for you, and I want to preface it by saying, as long as I've known you, you have always kept the focus on Rachel. It's never been about you. You're who we see and you're who we hear, but you've always been true to the mission of keeping the focus on Rachel. My question to you, Darrell, is this: how do you want to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered by a handful of people, because I've learned that the masses are your friends momentarily, but the people in your life that you love and care about, you're fortunate if you have 10 people that will remember you 20 years after you're gone. And I would like to be remembered as a servant, a person with a servant's heart who helped other people find out who they were. Because one of the things that took me years to do was find out who I am. I thought I was my personality. I thought I was what people said I was, or what I thought I was. Mm-hmm. But I found that there's something much deeper in me, my human spirit, that's eternal, and that's at peace always. Mm-hmm. My surface is not always at peace, but my inner being is. And I've learned to tap into that. My goal for the rest of my life is to help people tap into that inner peace that they already have, and they don't even know that they have. And I would like to be remembered as a peacemaker.
Well, you certainly are that, and you've devoted your life to something that you didn't wish for.
No.
But you made the commitment, and you've stayed true to that commitment. And I'm so grateful to know you, to know Sandy, and to be part of something that is so much bigger than all of us. And I'm grateful for the day that I was turned on to or introduced to Rachel's Challenge. So thank you. I'm going to close this out here, but I love you, my friend. I hope to see you soon. All right.
Love you too, John. Thank you.
Yes, sir. That's our show for today, folks. And I want to share with you one thing. Forgiveness, as we talked about, is a big part of Darrell's story. He said something to me in May of 2015 when we were having lunch together. He was sharing with me the future for Rachel's Challenge, he said all the programs he wants to introduce. Wish we had an unlimited budget for him to do it, because it's going to do nothing but spread good and kindness and compassion and connectivity into our world. But his words are still emblazoned right here in my mind. He said, all the good that Rachel's story has done, all the lives it's changed, all the lives it's saved, none of it would have been possible if I had not found it in my heart to forgive the 2 shooters who murdered my daughter. That is a level of forgiveness most of us will never have to get to. But I'm grateful that he found it, because without finding that, none of this would have come to pass. So that's our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure and stick around and watch the 5-minute clip of Darrell's testimony to Congress. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you. Until next time, be well.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized. Please let us hear from what you have to
Chairman.
say.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing my heart. At this very moment, in a cemetery in southern Denver, Chapel Hill Cemetery, they're erecting the 13 crosses that I think are well known across the country as a permanent memorial at the head of my daughter's grave. And my heart really longs to be there with my children, Bethany and her husband Don, Dana, Craig, and Mike, but it's with their blessing that I'm here today, and I appreciate that. I realize that I'm a mere pawn in today's hearings, but I'm a willing pawn because I dare to believe that I can make a difference. Every once in a while, a pawn has been used to checkmate a king, and I have no hidden agenda, and of course I have no political aspirations. I simply speak to you as a broken-hearted father, and I only ask that you allow your heart to hear me for the next few minutes. Since the dawn of creation, there's been both good and evil in the heart of men and women. And we all contain those seeds. We contain the seeds of kindness and the seeds of violence. And the death of my wonderful daughter, Rachel Joy Scott, and the deaths of that heroic teacher and the other 11 children who died must not be in vain. Their blood cries out for answers. The first recorded act of violence was when Cain slew his brother Abel out in the field. The villain was not the club he used. Neither was it the NCA, the National Club Association. The true killer was Cain, and the reason for the murder could only be found in his heart. In the days that followed the Columbine tragedy, I was amazed at how quickly fingers began to be pointed at groups such as the NRA. I am not a member of the NRA. I am not a hunter. I do not even own a gun. I'm not here to represent or to defend the NRA because I don't believe they're responsible for my daughter's death. Therefore, I don't believe they need to be defended by me. If I believed they had anything to do with Rachel's murder, I would be their strongest opponent. I am here today to declare that Columbine was not just a tragedy. It was a spiritual event that should be forcing us to look at where the real blame lies. Much of that blame lies here in this room. Much of that blame lies behind the pointing fingers of the accusers themselves. I wrote a poem just 4 nights ago that expressed my feelings best, and it was written before I knew that I would be speaking here today, and I'd like to read that. Your laws ignore our deepest needs. Your words are empty air. You've stripped away our heritage. You've outlawed simple prayer. Now gunshots fill our classrooms, and precious children die. You seek for answers everywhere and ask the question, why? You regulate restrictive laws through legislative creed, and yet you fail to understand that God is what we need. Men and women are 3-part beings. We have a body, and we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And I believe we fail to recognize that third element that really does need to be recognized by the legislative bodies of this country that's been ignored for so long. Spiritual influences were present within our educational systems for most of our nation's history. Many of our major colleges began as theological seminaries, and we know this is a historic fact. What has happened to us as a nation? We've refused to honor God, and in doing so, we open the doors to hatred and violence. And when something as terrible as Columbine's tragedy occurs, politicians immediately look for a scapegoat, such as the NRA. They immediately seek to pass more restrictive laws that continue to erode away our personal and private liberties. We don't need more restrictive laws. Eric and Dylan would not have been stopped by more gun laws or metal detectors. No amount of laws can stop someone who spends months of planning this type of massacre. The real villain lies within our own hearts. Political posturing and restrictive legislation are not the answers. The young people of our nation hold the key, and there is a spiritual awakening that's taking place that will not be squelched. We don't need more religion. We don't need more gaudy television evangelists spewing out verbal religious garbage. We do not need more million-dollar church buildings built while their basic needs are being ignored. We do need a change of heart and an humble acknowledgement that this nation was founded on the principle of simple trust in God. When my son Craig lay under that table in the school library and saw his 2 friends murdered before his very eyes, he didn't hesitate to pray in school. And I defy any law or politician to deny him that right. I challenge every young person in America and around the world to realize that on April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, prayer was brought back to our schools. Don't let the many prayers offered by those students be in vain. Dare to move into the new millennium with a sacred disregard for legislation that violates your conscience and denies your God-given right to communicate with Him. And to those of you who would point your finger at the NRA, I give to you a sincere challenge. Dare to examine your own heart before you cast the first stone. My daughter's death will not be in vain. The young people of this country will not allow that to happen. And remember that even a pawn in a master's hand can accomplish much.